Welcome metalheads to No Nonsense Metal Reviews. I'm George and today I have another band you need to hear. Another recommendation of a band that if you're not familiar with them, then you really need to hear them. It's well worth your time. May even be a future favourite of yours, you never know. So today's recommendation is a band that to be honest, I'm quite late to the party with. I know they've been around for a number of years. Long-term hiatus and breaks and split-ups and all kinds of different tumultuous things going on with these guys. But they've been around since the late 80s, I believe, or mid to late 80s. And for the fact that they only have 3 studio albums, full-length albums anyway, in their catalogue, they have had a massive impact on not just groove metal and thrash metal, where they predominantly preside, but also modern death metal and extreme metal through thrash, and they have had a massive impact right the way across the metal spectrum. And as I say, I'm fairly new to this band. I am talking about Exhorder from NOLA, New Orleans, Louisiana, the home of bands like Down and Crowbar and I Hate God, and also Exhorder. Now this is a very interesting band because, as I previously mentioned there, they have 3 studio albums to their name. They had their debut album, the absolutely magnificent Slaughter in the Vatican, which actually dates to 1990. Then we have the second album, The Law, which followed 2 years later, in 1992, and then we had a massive gap. There's, as I say, a huge gap there, which was the result of breaks and split-ups and hiatus and all kinds of different inter-band politics, shall we say. But in 2019, they released this wonderful album, Mourn the Southern Skies, which is a really, really excellent album, I must say. So for such a few albums, you've got some amazing material. Now, this particular article I will just draw your attention to. This is a lovely little reissue package on Dissonance Records from, I think it was 2022, so it was actually only last year now that this box set was released. And this was what brought my attention to the band, really. I think I saw that logo, it might have been on Amazon or eBay or whatever, and I thought, I do know that name, but I don't know why. But it's because it's such a prestigious name, it has a lot attached with it, a huge influence that they have been on a whole host of bands, from the likes of Lamb of God through Pantera, allegedly. You know, there's a huge influence going on here. And what is really lovely about these Dissonance Records reissues is you've got a really in-depth little booklet. It gives a good bio of the band, a good history, and there's some interesting little photos and bits and pieces like that. It's a really nice package. The only shame is that you don't get a proper picture of the album covers unless you remove the CD. But, you know, that aside, as I'm an artworks kind of guy, that aside, these are really nice packages. Really nice, actually. There's a few of these kicking around now from the likes of Atrophy, I think, and Whiplash. So it tends to be the old school thrash metal bands. But those guys aside, we're here to talk about Exhorder. So Exhorder, if you're not familiar with these guys, they are essentially a groove metal, thrash metal band. That's the broadest possible description that I can give their sound. However, their debut album, which was in 1990, Slaughter in the Vatican, that is a very interesting album, in my opinion, because that album was recorded at Morrisound Studio in Tampa, Florida, and it was engineered and mixed by Scott Burns, which is something that I have only learnt this afternoon when looking through this particular package and the little booklet, reading the information. and it's a fantastic album. It's very different. It's not a conventional groove metal or a conventional thrash metal album. Certainly thrash was well established by 1990. In fact, thrash metal was arguably, in the mainstream broadest sense anyway, actually in decline in terms of quality and just consistency. Lots of bands opting to actually change their sound and evolve in different directions. And groove metal was really only coming into its own with the massive success and emergence of Pantera when I think it was their 5th album, Cowboys from Hell, came out. Obviously that changed the game as far as groove metal goes. Kind of really spearheaded that movement. Alongside the likes of Exhorder, it seems. But that album, Slaughter in the Vatican, that is a very heavy album. When I was listening to that album again yesterday, with the purpose of doing this Bands You Need to Hear of these guys, I couldn't help but be reminded, but in quite a few places, by the first Deicide album, and also the first Morbid Angel album, or actually Morbid Angel's Altars of Madness, rather than the unreleased album, the debut there that should have been released and came out a few years later. But that side, I'm talking Deicide's first album and Morbid Angel's Altars of Madness. It had a little bit of that going on there, with also the kind of, I guess, the more visceral thrash, the likes of early Sodom and early Destruction. Little elements of that in there as well, but mainly it was the Deicide and Morbid Angel connection that I made there. And in that debut album, Slaughter in the Vatican, there is a real death metal, thrash metal crossover, where we have some really heavy, seriously nasty, almost sludgy, dirgy sounding thrash. Some absolutely killer tracks on that album. The opening track, Death in Vain, is a killer track. That is, I don't want to say it is a death metal song, but it's certainly on the end of thrash metal, where it is bordering on being old school death metal. Then we've got some other killer tracks here. We've got Desecrator, another ripping track with some killer riffs. Exhorder, the title track of the band, that is essentially more of a thrasher, and it's a ripping, thrashing number indeed. The Tragic Period, that's more of a elongated, quite dark, the whole album is quite dark and sinister to be honest, but that's quite a dark, slightly slower paced number in places, but some killer riff work there. Then we've got other tracks like Anal Lust, which is a pretty short, pretty nasty, thrashing number. A good song, no doubt. Then we've got the title track, Slaughter in the Vatican, another grisly, nasty, very thick, very visceral guitar tone. Very, as I say, very dirgy, it's sludgy, and it's absolutely putrid. But it just sounds so freaking good. I think if you're an old school death metal fan, that is one of those thrashing albums that could definitely really connect with you, because it has the aggression of thrash, it has the attitude of thrash, and it's fast paced, but it's got the sound and the viscosity that old school death metal has, and it really does ooze with that old Morrisound, Tampa death metal sound, and it's a great album. By the time we get to the second album, The Law, from 1992, that is a different sound and a different band altogether, in my ears anyway. That's this one here. Now, this album is far more typically groove metal, what I would call groove metal, and that is mainly because I have listened to and loved those classic 5 Pantera albums with Phil Anselmo, Vinnie Paul, Dimebag Darrell, and of course Rex Brown. I have listened to those and know those to embody groove metal, in my opinion. So that album, The Law, that really does carry the classic groove metal, kind of bordering on thrash at times, sound of Pantera. And of course, I do understand that a lot of people would argue that these guys were doing this sound before or to a greater extent than Pantera, but as a big fan of Pantera and only recently really getting into these guys, this is where my ears and my brain is coming from when I listen to this album. So The Law is a freaking fantastic album. The whole aesthetics look very different. The whole package is very different. The sound and the quality is very different indeed. The riffs are far more rooted in, I guess, traditional thrash bordering groove metal. Huge amounts of chug. So much groove. It sounds amazing. It's just the instantly intoxicating formula that gets you headbanging and going crazy to, thrashing like a maniac. And we've got some killer tracks there. The album kicks off with a song called Soul Search Me, and that is so full of absolutely just delightful chug. So much killer riffs there. Absolutely fantastic. Other great tracks from this album, because I'm not going to break it down and go through every single track, but other killer tracks, I Am the Cross, again, killer riffs. And we have Kyle Thomas on vocals there, delivering a nasty, far more Phil Anselmo sounding vocal performance than he does on the debut Slaughter in the Vatican. But he's on top form there. The drumming is tight. It's not as tinny as I think that sometimes Pantera, certainly in the early days, their drum sound, Vinny's sound there came across as. No, much bolder. But also, I have to say, those riffs are so cutting. There's just they really do stand at the forefront, and it's just pure metal. Absolutely delightful. So as I've mentioned, Soul Search Me and I Am the Cross. Interestingly, and I believe the reasoning for this particular cover version is that they were doing this live for quite a while prior to recording the album. But there is an interesting cover of Black Sabbath's Into the Void. Now, they do a fantastic version of it. It is a sludgy, NOLA sounding, chuggy, sludgy, doomy, thrashy number. It's great. It's a great cover. It's just an interesting choice, I have to say. But, I appreciate the rationale behind that. A great cover version, though. Elsewhere, we've got The Law, which is another great track. Very heavy, the title track there. But for me, the personal favourite, just because the level of crunch on these riffs is absolutely off the scale. The closing track there, Cadence of, close brackets, The Dirge. And that really is a dirgy number. Those riffs are so heavy, they're so weighty and so crunchy, it is absolutely incredible. It's heavy as hell. Pure groove. There is also some moments that are more reminiscent of just good old-fashioned thrash, but it's a great album. Absolutely fantastic. Just such a different sound and style to what we had in Slaughter of the Vatican. But if you fast forward however many years it is, 27 years or something crazy in between time before you get to this album, Mourn the Southern Skies. Now this is a complete change again. This is far more rooted in the groove metal and also more the case the traditional thrash style. But you get some absolutely killer material here. I love the opening track, My Time. That is so packed full of aggression and attitude. If you're having a shit time at work, maybe a bad day, your boss is an arsehole, you listen to My Time, that will give you the motivation and the strength, the inner strength, strength beyond strength. It's just got such great attitude. Absolutely love it. Asunder is a creepy, quite a sinister track there, but it's a good one. Hollowed Sound, that is a thrashing, punching number. Love that one. Beware the Wolf, that's a good song. That's a heavy number as well. Again, far more thrash. Does remind me in parts of, shall we say, bands like Heathen and maybe Testament. It's got that going on. Yesterday's Bones, a slightly slower paced number, full of groove, some killer riffs there. All She Wrote, another great track, very, very reminiscent actually of Lamb of God's kind of NOLA infused sound, where it's a bit southern. It's got tons of groove, tons of swagger. Great song there. And then we've got Ruination, another great track. Kind of reminds me of Testament again in places. Ripping Flesh, that is just a thrashing ripper. I absolutely love that one. It's a short, sharp shock. Brilliant song. We close the album with Mourn the Southern Skies, the title track, and that is a fantastic song. That is completely different. That is far more reminiscent of Down, with the kind of experimentation and their sort of doom, stoner doom, sludge doom, whatever you want to call it. Far more reminiscent of that. Some fantastic vocal work throughout this whole album, but particularly highlighted on that song by Carl Thomas. It's a great song. It's about 9 minutes long, but it's a really powerful, it's got a lot of soul, but it's a heavy song nonetheless. Highlights for me from this album, definitely the attitude and aggression of the opening track, My Time. Hollowed Sound is another great one from this. It's got that perfect mix of groove and thrash. It's a very speedy piece altogether. All She Wrote, with that reminiscence of Lamb of God and Testament. It's a great ripping number. The Arms of Man is a particularly killing track, which I failed to mention there. But Ripping Flesh, because it is such an abrasive, brash, thrashing number. It's full of energy. Love it. And that closing track there, Mourn the Southern Skies, is a masterpiece. It's an epic. So, overall, if you're not familiar with Exhorder, these guys are a superb band, a band that you absolutely need to hear. If you're a fan of old school death metal, thrash, groove metal, if you like Pantera or Deicide, if you like Slayer or Heathen, these guys are absolutely going to satisfy your taste buds for all things good and freaking heavy. Absolutely love them. So, Exhorder, a band you need to hear. Are you familiar with these guys? I know that they are a massively influential band and very, very popular. It's just that I'm quite late to the party, to be honest, with these guys. But better late than never. So if you've never heard of them, do check them out. And then let me know what you think, because I'm very interested to hear what you all think of Exhorder. Thank you very much for watching. Do feel free to like and subscribe and let me hear your thoughts and opinions. I'm interested to know. As always, my friends, you take care and stay heavy.